To start with the revision of DSE Level Biology Chapter 1. So before everything is to be said, first of all, ask yourself what you are doing in your school. Please focus on what you have learned instead of things that you do not know, as this is the best way for you to score a high mark. There is no point of saying I do not know everything. Also, you should set your goals at school, whether it is the goal in learning, sports, or extracurricular activities. And you should also adjust your attitude and mindset. You should adapt a growth mindset that you can do better instead you have a fixed asset, okay? And then use your time and resource wisely. I notice so many students are wasting their time, but time is your most precious resources. So for chapter 1, we are talking about 7 characteristics of organism. So here are the list of 7 characteristics: reproduction, growth, nutrition, respiration, respond to stimuli, movement, and also excretions. So all organisms should have all these characteristics, and you may notice that some of them are a little bit difficult to notice. Let's say the term growth, okay? For us human, you may notice that from a young boy to an adult, there is a growth. But how about plants? Plants also grow, but you seldom notice it. And then you might come to terms that plants don't grow. But obviously, there is growth for plants, right? So remember, the definition is based on all organism and not just human. Do not put yourself as a reference of the judgment of the characteristics, but put the definition as the reference when you make your judgment. You should also pay a good attention to the term respiration, because there is a closely related term breathing, and you should be able to distinguish their differences. The definition of excretion embraces all metabolic wastes. Metabolic wastes, by definition, are wastes produced by chemical reaction within the cell. And therefore, it does not include feces, as feces is not metabolic waste by definition. To summarize, you should note that the definition of all these characteristics is based on all organisms and all living things, and not just human. And we should also clarify the definition for all 7 characteristics, otherwise we may make mistake in pairing up certain actions of the body to their relevant characteristics. Scientific methods. And here are some common steps in scientific methods. First of all, we have an observation, and then we set a question. Later on, we build an hypothesis, and then probably we will make some predictions, and then we are going to test the hypothesis and analyze the data, and finally we draw a conclusion. Here I would like to make a deeper elaboration of the concept of hypothesis and prediction. Let's have an example of hypothesis. The respiration of grasshopper requires the consumption of oxygen. In this case, the prediction would be, without oxygen, grasshopper cannot carry out respiration. Then the research or experiment is to find out whether the prediction is correct. That is, we would like to find out if grasshopper cannot respire without oxygen is true. Because due to the principle of scientific method, scientists cannot be completely sure that a hypothesis is absolutely true. That is, it cannot be determined that something happened because of the existence of something. But the prediction can be determined to be absolutely true. That is, when something does not exist, then another thing cannot happen. The reliability of predictions depend primarily on the result of experiment. A prediction is considered support if the results of the experiment are the same after trying for many times. The successful verification of prediction increase the credibility of the relevant hypothesis, but it still does not rule out the possibility of other factors or explanations that have not been considered. And for the scientific method, there is a very important concept, the concept of control groups. Remember, for the control group, it is an identical setup as the experimental setup, except the factor that is under investigation is absent. The aim is to ensure the result of the experiment is only due to the factor under consideration. So let's say in the case of the presence of light, okay? So one group is without light and another group is with light. So light with or without, that is the presence of light, is the independent variable because it is the factor that you want to study. So what is the possible dependent variable? Let's say in the case of the presence of light, okay? So for the factors that we can measure, maybe there is growth or no growth or even death. So this is the dependent variable. It is the factor that you can measure, but you are not adjusting it directly by yourself. For the control variable in the example, you may notice that maybe the soil condition and also water amount is the controlled variable because that is the factors that you would like to keep constant in both setups. But to make it even simpler, scientific method is basically changing one thing and all the other things remains unchanged. For scientific report in biology, we would still like to invite students to have an understanding of the whole procedure. In that we would like to write a report so that people know what we are doing and also others can repeat our investigation. Here are the common elements in the report: aim, introduction, hypothesis, principle, apparatuses and materials, procedure, results, discussion, and conclusion. These 9 parts, you should bear in mind of them because later on in your SBA examination, you are going to use this framework in order to write a good report. And then for the points to note in the report, you should always use passive voice whenever possible, and you should also use a proper format to present your data like a table or a figure, and you should interpret your results because the results is objective, like 20 or 50, the numbers, but the interpretation can be subjective, like what is the meaning of 20 and 50. That is what we call interpretation. And you should also state the improvement and further study at the end of your report. But remember, don't just write some human error because this is pretty meaningless. Let's say you write, I am careless or she is careless. That doesn't make any sense to me. And for the nature of science, here are some features. Reasonable skepticism. So we don't just agree with others, even though, let's say, I'm your teacher, you don't just agree with me always. We don't agree with it naturally unless I am giving you or others are giving us evidence to support what they say. We should also have some creativity in mind and also imagination. And we also need to design the controls carefully. The fourth point is that science is an ongoing inquiry because whether it is the development of science or any kinds of knowledge, its development will never ends. Agreed? And the final two parts is about the cultural and social limitation, and there are also technological limitation limiting the development of science. And in chapter 2, you will encounter that the development of the cell theory depends on the development of the light microscopes. Finally, here is an extract of the HKEA document about the DSE examination, and I suggest everyone should have a close look on it because it clearly tells you that what you are expected to be able to do. So remember to go to Google and look for this document. This is the end of chapter 1 revision.